With their striking red and green colours, the Portugal national team has been recognised for their iconic kit, but also for the show-stopping flair players they've had over the years. The Portugal national team should have won more in their history, but they've still lifted one of the great international trophies. Here is glorious history of the Portugal national football team. Starting relatively late compared to some of their European rivals, Portugal founded a football federation in 1914. Their goal was to promote international tournaments and compete with opponents across Europe and the world. Their first game took years to happen because of World War I. Portugal played their first match against their neighbours Spain in 1921. Although we associate Portugal's footballing colours as matching their national flag, that legendary combination of a crimson red and green came later. In that first game, Portugal played in a black shirt with white shorts. They lost 3-1. Portugal played in black until the late 20s, eventually changing to their more recognisable red shirt, but initially with blue shorts. They also played on occasion in a blue and white kit which matched their old national flag, which changed to their more recognisable red and green in 1910. We might associate Portugal with great players and a team capable of beating anyone, who appear in almost every major tournament, but this wasn't always the case. Their early history from the 20s to the early 60s was difficult. Portugal tried and tried to qualify for the World Cup, but failed each time. A relatively small nation, they initially found it tough to find the kind of talent that South American and European rivals were able to. Something changed in the early 60s though. Benfica, one of the big three of Portuguese club soccer, won the European Cup 2 years running in the 1960-61 and 1961-62 seasons. With a sensational club team dominating Europe, the expectation for the national team rose too. Portugal's national team had some good players in their early history, but in the 60s, they had their first superstar. A player who was being heralded in the same breath as a rising talent in Brazil you might have heard of, called Pelé. Eusebio, a star player for Benfica's dominant team, was also shining for the national team. When the conversation turns to greatest players ever, you often hear Pelé mentioned, Maradona, Leo Messi, and other Portuguese talent we'll hear about later. But Eusebio also gets thrown into that pool as well. He really was that good. The guy scored 317 goals in 301 games for Benfica, which is an insane record. Throughout his club career, he scored 424 goals in 436 games at club level and 41 goals in 64 games for Portugal. His reputation was building well by 1966, and it would be with Portugal in the World Cup that he really announced himself to the entire world. Everyone in England remembers '66 because it remains England's greatest glory. But who was the best player in the '66 tournament? It was Eusebio. This guy had already won the Ballon d'Or a year previously. Portugal were impressive. They scored goals for fun, but Eusebio especially, and he ended up with the Golden Boot, scoring 9 goals in the tournament. By the time Portugal reached the semi-finals, many were expecting them to go all the way and lift the trophy. They lost in the end to eventual winners England in a close game, but no one would forget Eusebio in a hurry. The only way was up, right? Wrong. In the late 60s, Eusebio was beginning to struggle with injuries. It seems he'd peaked around that infamous '66 World Cup. In 1970, Portugal failed to qualify for the World Cup. Between 1960 and 1972, with Eusebio as their talisman, they were also unable to qualify for any of the European Championships, which began in 1960. To make life more difficult, Eusebio played his last game for Portugal in 1973. The team would have to push forward without him. From '66 until 1984, Portugal failed to qualify for any national tournament. Portugal's national team saw a marked improvement in the mid-1980s. They had some solid players like goalkeeper Manuel Bento, who was named Portuguese Goalkeeper of the Year 8 times. They also had João Pinto, a right-back who English manager Bobby Robson once described as having 2 hearts and 4 legs because he never stopped running. And up front, Rui Jordão, an excellent attacker. In 1984, Portugal finally qualified for a European Championship and managed to reach the semi-finals. They lost 3-2 to eventual champions France despite Jordão scoring twice. Portugal's 3rd place in the Euros and some rising talent meant that optimism was high going into the 1986 World Cup. They managed to qualify but fell out in the group stage, not progressing as far as many expected them to. Portugal went through a tough period. They failed to qualify for the next 3 World Cups. Despite this disappointment, they were bringing through a crop of superb players like Paulo Sousa, Rui Costa, and Luis Figo. They could have walked into most sides in the world, and yet Portugal were finding it difficult to qualify for the tournaments. Despite reaching a quarter-final in Euro 1996, their nation in the 90s was deemed one of the great underachievers in the world of football, and that didn't change in the early aughts. Their first World Cup appearance since 1986 came in 2002, but despite a talented squad, they couldn't get out of the group stage. There was just something missing. They had dazzling skill in midfield, but lacked a killer instinct up front, the kind of goal machine striker that could take them further like Eusebio. In Euro 2004, Portugal finally clicked into gear and looked as if they could seriously challenge for a trophy. Alongside the likes of Figo, they had mercurial talent like Deco. They also had a rising star named Cristiano Ronaldo. He was insanely talented, even if his play was occasionally inconsistent and selfish at his young age. But Portugal progressed through Euro 2004, beating England along the way and found themselves in a final against underdogs Greece. Not a person outside of Greece fancied anything but a Portugal victory, but Greece had already upset several big nations on their way. The team filled with world-class talent just couldn't defeat the workmanlike but determined Greeks. Portugal had finally made a final though, and it felt like a new breed of players might be able to lead the nation to victory. With Rui Costa and Figo getting older, Ronaldo and Nani were now being looked upon as the great hopes of the nation. Portugal followed up Euro 2004 with a 4th place finish in the 2006 World Cup. Once again, they beat England along the way. It felt like only a matter of time before the ever-improving Ronaldo led them to a World Cup or Euros victory. But more disappointment was to follow. Between 2010 and 2018, Portugal couldn't progress past the round of 16 in the World Cup. Increasingly, it felt like the squad wasn't as blessed with talent as the Rui Costa and Figo era. They were more reliant on one player to make things happen. Even if Ronaldo was one of the 2 greatest players of his generation, alongside Leo Messi, in the Euros they were closer, perhaps due to not being up against the might of South America. Portugal reached the quarterfinals in 2008 and the semi-final in 2012. Unfortunately for Portugal, they came up against a superior Spain team, losing on penalties. Despite their World Cup disappointments, Portugal looked more of a threat during the European Championships, and in 2016 Portugal's first trophy arrived. They made hard work of it. After drawing their 3 group games, Portugal seemed like a team resting too much on a player in his 30s. If Ronaldo was kept quiet, the team seemed to retreat too. Many wondered if they'd had their best years and didn't fancy the team to go all the way. Although lucky to reach the knockouts, Portugal kept on progressing with each tough game. They narrowly beat Croatia and then Poland before meeting Wales in the semi-finals. Wales had hugely overperformed in the tournament, and Portugal were expected to make easy work of them. It was their most convincing performance of the tournament, a 2-0 victory, sending Portugal to the final to meet France. Disaster struck early when their talisman Ronaldo was injured after only 25 minutes. He took a knock after just 7 minutes and tried to continue, but he just couldn't continue. Ronaldo was devastated, and everyone sensed a French victory. Ronaldo's teammates raised their game, and substitute Adar scored an extra-time winner to give Portugal the victory and their first major trophy. The 2018 World Cup was a disappointment for Portugal. who were knocked out in the round of 16. But they would add another trophy to the cabinet the following year, with Portugal winning the 2019 UEFA Nations League, a tournament founded in 2018. Next came the Qatar World Cup in 2022. This was billed by many as the last chance for Ronaldo or Messi to win a World Cup. It would also be considered the decider in the age-old debate over who was the greatest player between Ronaldo or Messi. Portugal weren't too convincing in the group stage, and Ronaldo ended up being dropped by the manager in the round of 16 match against Switzerland. Minus Ronaldo, Portugal turned on the style to beat the Swiss 6-1. Could they go all the way? It was a statement performance, but in the quarterfinals they came up against Morocco, who had surprised many during the World Cup. Morocco were victorious, and Portugal went home hugely disappointed. To make it worse for Ronaldo, Messi and Argentina won the World Cup. With a few rising talents like Joao Felix, Portugal may just have a new generation coming who might bring success back to the nation. But now the reliance on Ronaldo is having a negative impact on the team. In Euro 2024, Portugal kept faith with a 39-year-old Ronaldo, but he could offer little for the team. They fell at the quarter-final stage in a tournament that may have brought an end to their greatest icon's national team career. Who can be the next Ronaldo or Eusebio? Will Portugal add to their trophy collection? Drop us a comment and be sure to like and subscribe. This is Football Historian, and we'll see you on the next one.